All right, recording has started, and this is the August 12th, 2021 Crossplane community meeting. Feel free to add yourself to the attendees list here if you want to be included there. I will drop a link in the Zoom chat right now for to the agenda document, so you have easy access to it there too, and you can hop into the party here. Now Nick with editing access, though, he may disable or remove any of your comments you may add, so we'll see how he behaves. But let's jump on into the agenda here. I think we've got a fairly long agenda. I don't know how many of these are small items or bigger discussions, but let's start making progress. So upcoming next release is the 1.4 release. With our typical 2-month cadence, that would be putting the release date to August 31st, which it has been the entire time here, so no changes there. We're coming up on that. We're like 2.5 weeks out or so. And so with the normal typical flow, we'll be entering into feature freeze next week. I think maybe like Tuesday-ish or so, but sometime mid next week, we'll be entering feature freeze, and then the week after that, code freeze, and then the following week will be the release. So if there's outstanding features or bigger ticket items that we want to get into, then yeah, feel free to go ahead and work with folks to kind of get those reviewed, get those in, so that we can kind of try to slot in all the riskier, churnier sort of things before feature freeze starts. And Dan, it looks like Dan dropped into the chat here another opportunity for folks to introduce themselves if they haven't already. So I'll pause for a quick second in case anybody does want to introduce themselves still. Alrighty, so we can jump into the 1.4 board here. I think we got a good turnout on the call here today. So let's go ahead and we don't have to visit every issue on the board here. That's not necessarily the agenda, but the purpose of right now is to kind of talk about the big items that are in play for 1.4, as well as what may be needed to wrap them up and get them in as well. And maybe some good stopping points, and then also other items that may not make it or that are of importance, and then especially things that folks in the community either are working on or think are important items that they would like to voice a vote for. So I'll go ahead and kind of start it off with Nick, since he's at the top right here. And some of the work that you've been doing there, Nick, you can kind of catch us up on that real quick.
Yeah, sure. The two key things that I have in flight in implementation at the moment that are sort of in review stage. One is a new feature of Crossplane, which we're calling composition revisions. The general idea with this is up until this point in Crossplane 1.3, we have our Crossplane composite resources, which are powered by a sort of a template of sorts called a composition. And you can have an arbitrary number of composite resources that are of your definition, your Acme Corp database, let's say, that uses a composition to say, okay, actually, when someone creates an Acme Corp database, go make an RDS instance and an IAM role or whatever you need to sort of what that database should be composed of. Today, when you update that composition, if there's 10 composite resources, 10 XRs using that composition, they all just update straight away to match the state of the composition, which is often not what you want, right? You might want to like slowly roll out changes through your organization and test it on one composite resource or something before you sort of roll it out to all the others. So there is a pull request open and a design doc merged for adding composition revision support to Crossplane. I'm hoping that it will land in Crossplane 1.4. I'll need to nudge the other maintainers to do another review pass, I think, so that we can get it in before the feature freeze next week, but I'm definitely hoping to have that in for 1.4. It will be behind a feature flag. One thing that we're looking at doing going forward is all features, definitely in Crossplane core, potentially in providers that are alpha, including resources that are alpha. I would like to get behind a feature flag and have them off by default, just because we have definitely found that even though we have API types and code that is marked alpha, it's easy to miss that and not understand the expectations, but Crossland basically doesn't have a contract for alpha resources. So yeah, that's one thing. The other thing is there is a PR that does a sort of, this is less shiny, exciting features, more reliability and quality. We discovered a couple of races and a security issue with the Crossland claim reconciler. And sadly, when I say discovered a security issue, I mean I was in there refactoring it and I saw a to-do that said, hey, maybe there's a security issue from me about 6 months ago. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And it turns out there was a potential security issue there. So there is a problem in Crossplane at the moment in 1.3 where a claim, which is a namespace resource, can explicitly target a composite resource that does not belong to it up at the cluster level. Could just say, hey, you know, I own this composite resource, and Crossplane will just honor that, unfortunately. So there is code that checks this, but the code was refactored at some point and was moved out of order. So basically, currently a claim, if someone has RBAC access in one namespace, but not in another namespace, you can make a claim that points to an XR that was started from another namespace and just delete it or change it, things like that. So that's not great. So there's a fix open for that at the moment. Again, just a review.
Just a small question there. So is this because we don't check the claim ref on the XR and just like, you know, let it work with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, so we do check the claim ref, but we check it too late. We check it, so the flow at the moment is we if it's being deleted, we don't check at all. And if it's not being deleted, we actually currently render out the XR and then we go into the bind stage. And in the bind stage, we check whether they're allowed to bind. But at that point, it's too late, right? We've already overwritten the XR. So that's all being refactored and reordered, which will be functionally no change. There was also a potential race in there as well, which is kind of getting nitty-gritty details. But there's basically a lot of hardening of the claim reconciler logic in one PR. So those are the two big things I have personally in flight at the moment.
Nick, on the fix you were just talking about, do you plan on backporting that to all active branches and then doing immediate patches on those?
I hope to. It is a fairly large change, so it's possible that we could get into some on one hand, I don't think we've touched the claim reconciler for a while, and it is constrained to the claim reconciler. So hopefully those backports will be simple. But yes, it does seem to be, it's a security fix, so it does seem to be something that we will want to backport.
Gotcha. Also, just a heads up to everyone, with the 1.4 release coming out, that by default means that the 1.1 release branch will be going out of upstream service. So plan accordingly.
Right. So we'll have 1.4, 1.3, and 1.2 will be the supported sort of versions that we patch things for.
Awesome, Nick. Yeah, thanks for all those updates there and some of the things you're digging into right now, and then the effort to get those in for the 1.4 release and then backporting it as well too. Muafik, do you want to give us an update on some of the things that you've been focusing on as well too?
Yeah. So I think there are a few things here that are assigned to me, but my focus has been on another thing for a while now, which is, so we are working on a new code generation tool called Terajet that will be generating CRDs and controllers for arbitrarily terraformed resources. There has been another effort a while ago regarding that, but that hasn't seen the finish line. But I believe in the next weeks we will have something working where you can, like, either on your own or contributing to Crossplane contrib. You can have any Terraform provider being as a source of truth for that generation pipeline, and then in the end you would have a provider just like any other Crossplane provider that has the support for all the resources for that specific provider. And our first candidates are just as usual, like AWS, Azure, and GCP. But I believe once we have all those three, we will also cover a lot of exceptional cases, and then community can contribute more Terraform generated providers from Terraform. So that's I think the the biggest thing that that me, Hassan, and Alper are working on and hoping to demo it on the next community meeting, at least some part of it, if ready. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely really exciting stuff to vastly expand coverage of supported resources in the near term. And Waf, did you, I know there was more activity on the design document for cross-resource references. Is that near a state to be ratified, or what's the big things left on it?
Yeah, it is very close to merging. It is just, I think it needs some rewording about, like, its goals and like what it wants to achieve. Initially, we thought it would, like, at least, I mean, we still think, like some of us still think, like, that is the case, but like we're still kind of deciding whether we want this to replace existing cross-resource references or just be an additional layer where you can refer an information from any resource to any other resource. And in fact, today we were brainstorming with Hassan and Alper, and I think having this would help with cross-provider references as well, which is just like not possible to do in development time, as opposed to our, like, current cross-resource references.
Right.
And the use case we were thinking was that you would use native provider AWS or native provider Azure for most of your resources, and for the ones that are not implemented yet, you would use like Terraform based one and refer to them, like, refer to each other using this new patching mechanism, let's say. So there are a few things, like, conceptual things that we need to ratify. But yeah, the technical stuff, like, how the API looks and stuff, it's close to getting merged from that respect.
Awesome. Okay, cool. That sounds good. Is Hassan on the call? Yes, Hassan's on the call as well too. Hassan, and I know you've been focusing on like pluggable secret stores, which is a highly requested feature from the community. Do you want to give us a quick update on where that is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, currently I have, like, I'm about to open a design document for that. Basically, there are a couple of options that we can follow, and I'm planning to open a design document with, like, listing all different options and to gather some feedback from the community. Basically, like, for people who are not familiar with the issue, this would plan to support different secret store or secret backends other than Kubernetes secrets to write connection details, so that hopefully we can, let's say, store our connection details in a vault instance, for example. So I know that, like, there are a lot of people who are interested in the issue. But if there are any other feedback until I could open the design doc, anyone could comment on the tickets with any suggestion. Otherwise, stay tuned for the design doc, and we will be able to make an open discussion on the design doc.
Perfect. Yeah, that'll be a great opportunity for folks from the community to weigh in on some of the options there and where we're going with that design. Especially since it is a highly demanded feature from the community. That'll be really good to get some feedback and make sure that we're taking this in the direction that's going to solve people's problems. So thanks for that, Hassan.
Okay.
And Alper, do you have something you want to go ahead and update the community on as well too for 1.4 and some of the work you've been doing?
Yeah. Regarding this support merging rather than replacing objects, it had a companion pull request in Crossplane runtime, which got merged. And I have also received comments from Nick for the Crossplane counterpart, which actually exposes the API as part of the patches. I haven't been able to, address those reviews, but, I definitely would like to, if possible, get this for 1.4. So I will try to, continue on the review process for that. So maybe should I give some details on what it's supposed to do?
I think that status is perfect out there of of where it is now, and the runtime part is merged, and then the core aspect of the experience around it. We're hoping to get in for 1.4. We incorporate that feedback. So that sounds perfect. Yeah. Awesome, Alper.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Dan, did you have some things that you were focusing on to get in for 1.4 as well too?
There's a couple, I guess, in the in progress column. The exposing poll interval and external client, that's implemented for AWS and GCP. I think I still need to add that to Azure. But that just basically gives you the ability to set how often we check manage resources at the kind of global scale on providers. And then we can spread that around to provider Crossplane contrib as well. And yeah, the only other thing is the too many update calls for CRDs, which I added to the further discussion at the end of this call. We can chat about it there.
Oh, sounds good. All right. So then also an important part of this part here, well, two things. One, anything else from contributors on the call here that they want to update us on, or things that they're working on, or things they want that they're planning to include in 1.4? All right, and so if that's most of the work that's ongoing there, I'd also open the floor to the general community here, everyone on the call. If there are things that are on your mind, or things that, issues that you are hoping to get addressed or want to put a +1 on, then, that's the perfect time to go ahead and voice your support for some issues right now too.
Before we jump into that, one thing I considered that we might want to doing this a bit off the cuff, but one thing that may be worth doing is sort of giving a bit of a general update from the various companies that work on Crossplane as to like what those people are focused on when they are contributing. And I think at the moment that's Upbound is one of the the primary owners of Crossplane and contributors. And I'm looking at this board and I'm seeing that nothing's moved into the done column yet for the 1.4 release, and I'm worried that people might think we're not doing very much. So just to set context, a lot of that is because the Terajet stuff that Mufas mentioned, like we're actually doing a lot on the provider front at the moment rather than this release. So for context, it's kind of mostly me working on Crossplane core at the moment this release, which is why you might not see too much having flowed all the way through that board.
Yeah, I'm hoping to close out a fair amount of these as well too over the next week, and their feature freeze and code freeze as well too. So yeah, it seems like there's a lot of progress, a lot of things that people have been focusing on as a whole. Okay, cool. Yeah, and we're always available for and happy to receive feedback on issues that are of importance to the community. So this is not the only venue to do that. Feel free to always put a thumbs up on issues that are important to you, and talk about them on Slack as well too, so that we can kind of get some visibility onto any issues that may be important for folks. Okay. So I think then we can go ahead and move on to the community topics section of the agenda here. So up front, real quick, we have a couple of links to various contents like live streams and webinars and videos and all sorts of stuff like that. Since the last community meeting, there is, I think Victor just released a new video today, I think this morning, about how to use Crossplane and Flux together to manage your infrastructure. So that was a good video. I already got a chance to see that one already. That's the top link here. Aaron did a live stream last week about some of the support he added recently for a GKE auth provider, so that Provider Helm works very well going forward, newer versions of GKE. I think Dan and Steven did a deep dive recently on Crossplane with the SIVO folks. So there's oh, cool, nice little, oh, whoa, it plays too. Oh, wow, that's cool. A little preview there for you. So another good kind of thing to start diving into some more of the specifics and internals of Crossplane. And then the Kubernetes Atlanta meetup that we had talked about last time, the recording is up here. So I shared that link here in the doc as well too. So a number of great video resources to check out and stay on top of various use cases for Crossplane and the new stuff we've been doing. So you can check those out there. We've had this documentation survey here for the Crossplane.io docs for a couple weeks now, so I probably won't include it for the next agenda. But I think that we're still happy to receive feedback around your experience with the documentation, how things are presented, what the quick start experience is like. So feel free to jump into that survey and provide your opinion on it as well too. Quick update for the incubation advancements with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So the TOC vote is underway. I think we're up to like 4 binding votes now, and we need a total of either 8 or 9. I can't remember now. But so yeah, those votes are coming in as the process is unfolding. So hopefully by the next community meeting, we'll have an update where we have the binding votes, and we can go ahead and make the announcement that that the incubation proposal has been accepted and ratified. Quick announcement about new maintainers. So a number of folks that have been contributing to Crossplane as a project for a while now, and doing some great work around reviewing pull requests and enforcing the code quality standards and all that sort of stuff, have been made maintainers on a couple of various providers and projects. So Hassan, Alper, and Aaron are all newer maintainers, and they're happy to jump in and start or continue. Actually, it's kind of a continuation of their efforts, but continuing to review pull requests and kind of keep things merging and helping the community out. So thank you very much, Hassan and Alper and Aaron, for all the work you've been doing and the commitment to the project as well too, to keep growing the maintainer team and scaling the community as a whole. So that's fantastic. I don't think Ben's on the call today, but so Ben Agricola, a wonderful community contributor, has in his Squiz, the company he works for, have made a contribution to the Crossplane organization of a new provider for Cloudflare. So that's something that they had been working on for a while, and it seems fairly robust so far. I didn't get a chance to look too deep in it. Does anybody want to, maybe Dan, if you have a little bit more context about some of the scenarios that's opening up for folks or this new provider?
Yeah, I honestly haven't used it at all or anything like that, but I do know that I believe it's used in a production setting today. And so I have reasonable confidence in its quality. We're definitely, right now it doesn't have, Crossplane CI set up with it. So we're working on getting that set up, and then we'll have official Crossplane images being published for folks to be able to consume. So if that's something you're interested in, we can definitely probably be a cool thing to get some of the folks who worked on that on a live stream and walk through it and kind of give descriptions for the resources it supports. And then you can also see those on doc.crds.dev also.
Yeah, really, really excited to see new providers coming out, and especially ones that are have a good maturity to them as well too. It's kind of fleshed out a little bit. Okay, cool. Let's see. Next topic here is around KubeCon, North America. I think it's like October 11th to 13th or something along those lines. We received an email this morning to all project maintainers and the CNCF in general that about getting in our desire, I suppose, for how we want to engage at KubeCon. The project pavilion, like having a little booth and stuff like that. So at this time, just of this morning, they are still pushing forward with an in-person component, so we can have a booth and be interacting with folks in person in Los Angeles this October. So I wanted to just kind of let people know about that appears to still be on the table. There is a possibility for still for being in person and attending KubeCon and staffing and being part of the Crossplane booth. I've already got some interest from Dan and Grant and maybe Victor as well too. So if folks are interested in that, let me know. But I think we've got a few folks there, so we'll probably push forward and have the booth there and have some in-person component of it as well too. There's also it's a hybrid event, so there's virtual aspects of it as well too. So I think the office hours component is virtual. So there will be multiple opportunities for folks to engage, and present, and be part of this experience as well too. You don't have to be in Los Angeles for that to happen. So any interest of being at the booth or hosting or participating in the office hours or things like that, just let me know, and happy to include as many people as want to get involved, basically. All right, cool. And then Nick, do you want to talk about we talked a little bit about it in the status, but just like as a general initiative that you're undertaking this quarter?
Yeah, sure. Similar, but basically what it says on the agenda, what it says on the tin. One of my big focuses this quarter is going to be quality, performance, and security investments in Crossplane. Particularly scalability. We increasingly are seeing folks come to us and say, hey, Crossplane works okay with thousands of composite resources, but it gets kind of slow. And this is something we absolutely expected. The team that's been working on Crossplane for a while has definitely taken a we don't want to prematurely optimize approach. We designed for sort of code readability and extensibility, and now that we're finding the people operating at scale, we have data, we can start investing in some things. I am also looking at, as I mentioned, some race conditions, security, things like that. One sort of note here is that unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I am going to be looking at this from areas that have the biggest impact possible. So if there's updates we can make to our overall reconciliation strategy, our overall sort of controller libraries, Crossplane core, things like that, I'm probably not going to be your person to like dig into individual resources that are, one managed resource or the other that's having quality issues sort of thing. I'm going to focus on, if something affects 10 different managed resources or all Crossplane resources or something like that. That's what I'm going to try and focus on this quarter.
I think that effort there, Nick, is going to have big dividends that pay off as well too, man. So I'm really excited to see that, and that you've already dove into it and starting to find some good issues and investments to make here. So thanks a lot for doing that.
Yeah, I will say if anyone has an issue that feels, I haven't really got too much of a system going on. The one thing I have done is anything that's scalability or performance limiting. We do have a label that is the performance label in some of our repos. If anything immediately springs to your mind that you haven't seen me pop up on the issue in the last couple of days, please do ping me on Slack or drop it in the chat here, and I'll make sure I add the performance label to it. Or if you've got any sort of quality or scalability things, quality or security things that I should be looking into, please do bring them to my attention. I'm trying to just sort of get a picture of all the outstanding issues that are there at the moment to sort of prioritize and start sort of figuring out where to get started.
Awesome. Okay, then Muafik, do you want to talk about provider ownership here?
Yeah. Well, so ownership may not be the best word, but last week we met with the maintainers to talk about something that's been like, a topic of in my mind. That is like, sometimes there are issues open and like your PRs open, but for a while they don't get response, or like for some reason they just slip through the cracks. So especially the provider ones. So we wanted to say assign or have someone just keep track of them, like not actually working on them or fixing them, but actually bringing them up in the community meeting or or upon planning meetings, so that we are aware and we are we prioritize so that those issues so that those issues are acknowledged and kept track of. So these are the initial assignments. So AWS has two, me and Aaron, because it's got the most activity among the providers, and Azure and GCP. Azure has Alper and GCP has Hassan. So as I said, these are not that assignment is not meant for hey, you are the one that everyone should ask questions or should fix the PR, review all the PRs and all that stuff. But it's just that keeping track of things and being on top of the issues so that like, the community is aware of them. For example, if you bring up some issue here, a community member could, take that issue and like, fix it. But like if no one, like, we can't go into like every individual issue and like, triage them in the community meeting. So these people will do that like, interactively, and then like, come up with a list of issues or PRs that are like, worth mentioning in the next community meeting. Yeah, so that's the idea. And if anyone is interested in like, contributing in this way, you're definitely welcome. Please reach out to me, Nick, or Jared, or like, other maintainers. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I wanted to make too, Muafik, is that, we're like the way you scale the throughput or velocity of an open source community is, scaling the folks that can help shepherd PRs through too, right? So, we're always happy to grow the maintainer team. If folks want to get more deeply involved, start reviewing pull requests, making more contributions, we're happy to work with folks and kind of support, their growth as maintainers and scaling the project that way. So always reach out to us if you're interested in getting deeper into the project and contributing more. Happy to have more people and continue to scale the community. Awesome. So yeah, thanks for everyone's efforts on that. Definitely appreciate that. Nick, you wanted to talk about an InDesign column too?
Yeah, just a thought that came up earlier in this. One thing I noticed when I look at this board is that for folks who aren't intimately familiar with the goings on of the Crossplane project as some of us maintainers are, it's probably not obvious. There's a bunch of stuff that says it's in progress, like pluggable secret stores. A lot of the things about like pulling. Can't find it now, but the cross resource references and things like that. And I think that it's very vague as to like, are we just like starting to think about it in the time frame of this release, or can you actually, is there a good chance that it will ship in this release? And I actually think that like 30% of the things on this board are actually design documents that the feature won't actually be there in 1.4, but we'll just aligning on the design. So I would suggest that we might want to actually break up the sort of in progress and review in progress to reflect whether it's actually implementation is in progress or just design doc is in progress, or just maybe add like a design doc column to be like, yeah, we're in design or something like that. Don't know how folks feel about that, but I feel like it might make it more obvious, as we draw to the end of a release, what is likely to actually be included features-wise in this release.
Yeah, good question, Nick. One of the things that I might be kind of struggling with that is, if like being able to represent the various states of the progress of something that's a design document only, like if it's in design, and then does it have like a separate column that's in review as well too, or is it just stay in the in design column until it ships, or is there a separate done column to like, do you separate or bifurcate like designs and features the entire way across the board? Or I'm not quite sure exactly how to manage the lifecycle yet. So I would have to kind of think about that and see what that experience is like a little bit more.
Yeah, my hunch is just like an in design column that comes between to do and in progress would be probably the.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That can make plenty of sense. I'm not against that at all. One thing that is nice is that I think, at least mostly through convention's sake, is that the things that are design only focus is that the issues tend to have design document in the title, at least. I think like the cross resource reference one is one I could think of, says design document on it, so that does help with the clarity. I don't think we do that ubiquitously, but that is somewhat helpful. Either way, though, having an InDesign column, which is very clear about what sort of focus is going on, and what is the maturity of the effort there that's still in the design phases, could be helpful, and I definitely support that.
Do we need to vote on that or anything, or can I just throw a?
Yeah, you've got editor permissions on this Google Doc, so you can just do anything willy-nilly across the project now. yeah, that sounds good to me, Nick. Okay, cool. I want to just call quick attention to this item here. This item, I guess, in the agenda is that I added this one a couple community meetings ago, and I think it has a lot of potential too. folks can like be adding things to it, before the meeting or as we're progressing, is that this, I think like the intent of this agenda item here is just things of interest that have gone on in the community recently, like interesting discussions on Slack where somebody's using Crossplane in a way we hadn't really heard of before, or running into an interesting issue that didn't get some attention earlier in the meeting. Just interesting things happening in the community. Feel free for upcoming community meetings to add stuff into here as well too, to kind of call attention to it as a bit of a catch-all for things that maybe weren't discussed otherwise, but are interesting things that are just kind of neat to talk about, or educational or fun too. So feel free to add stuff into that column or this item for next time too. So we'll keep moving along though, because we're about 2/3 through and I see a lot of links here, but I don't know if that indicates how duration of them. But Nick, I think you added this this item here, news since last community meeting.
Yeah, so so I might have misunderstood, but basically when Mubaf mentioned this concept of provider ownership, i.e. that people will come and sort of give a bit of an update as to where the providers are at, and will be, I think there was two parts of it, right? One was that they'll be responsible for sort of triaging provider issues sort of thing, and keeping people honest, making sure there's assignees. I actually volunteered to do that for Crossplane and Crossplane Runtime. And one of our kind of forcing functions we discussed doing potentially was to effectively do a status update of this meeting, so that at least we have to shame ourselves by being like there's 100 open pull requests or whatever, and so people a bit of accountability there. So this is just my attempt to do that. We don't have to walk through all of them. This is effectively there's perhaps some overlap with the PRs to discuss or something, but this is more a handful of issues that I thought were of interest that are new since the last community meeting. And also just the note that there are, there's about 10 other things that have been opened that I didn't think were particularly that were not so much from the community or already had action sort of thing. So you can basically look at this list of things as stuff that is new in the last 2 weeks that may or may not, that probably warrants like attention sooner rather than later. That isn't just a like, hey, we should go build this sometime in the future kind of issue, or an internal sort of accounting thing from the maintainer team. So we're still figuring this out. I do see that this agenda is getting sort of pretty long. There's overlap with other sections. So, I don't know, it might be worth like a meta sync at some point to figure out how we want to do this or represent this.
And Nick, are there any specific issues here that you want to dive into, or kind of worth getting into at least a high level overview about them for educational sake here, or not?
No, I don't think so. Some of them we've already covered, like the races and security one. And the others are kind of fairly straightforward things. It's more just an accountability that, like, let's say the Scaleway thing, right? Someone from the community wants Scaleway support as a provider, just as a, definitely we're probably not going to go build that in the next sprint or anything like that. We just wanted to mention these things as they come up.
What is Scaleway? I'm asking for a friend.
I have no idea. Yeah, I haven't got that far.
Okay, cool.
Cloud provider or something.
Okay, I'll tell my friend Dan, and I'll tell Nick's friend too. Okay, cool. All right, that sounds good. Yeah, thanks for bringing some attention to those as well, Nick. All right, and then let's jump into the PRs as well too, to kind of get some eyes on these. Nick, you're up first for this one.
Yeah, this is one that we asked for some community input for, and I think we've already got a good amount of community input that is at least tangentially around what we were saying. So a while ago, one community member added a bit of functionality to all Crossplane resources once the new Crossplane runtime release goes out, where in the debug logs, if we determine that a particular resource is not up to date, i.e. that we need to go and do something to the cloud to change it to match your declarative state, we'll now include in our debug log about that a little diff of why we think it's not up to date. And I think that's a great idea. This is a tricky part of the logic, and a lot of the comments on this pull request so far are people calling that out. So when you're developing Crossplane resources, definitely, and often if you're like debugging or trying to, if you're deployed Crossplane and you're like, with this one resource that updates all the time. It's just constantly stuck updating and I can't figure out why. It's now going to be much easier to debug that by turning on the debug logs and like looking at the pod logs of Crossplane. So another community member saw that and thought, that's great. We should also do that in the events that are emitted by Crossplane. And this has been, I guess, a little bit more controversial for a lot of folks. So, well, the idea there is that you could do a kubectl describe, let's say my RDS instance or something, and if it was needing an update, it would actually include a diff in its events that say, here's why it needs an update, this field changed. Some of the concerns that we have around this, mostly from the maintainer team, are just that we already have a hunch that Crossplane is overusing events. Going back to the scalability thing, I think a lot of the reason that we do see slowdowns in high scale clusters is because often on each reconcile, every 30 seconds, each resource will emit like 3-4 events or something like that. So if you include a diff in the event and it's a large diff, the size of those events, which are just Kubernetes objects written to the API server, gets a lot bigger, and it's quite noisy in the updates as well. There's also a lot of logic to deduplicate events. So if the event sort of changes a bit in the diff from time to time, then it'll have less deduplication of the output there. So my personal opinion on this is that the sweet spot is having this enabled in debug logs, but not having it enabled in the actual events that are output there. But the main reason I bring this up is just to bring it to folks' attention. I would love it if people could open this issue up, have a read through, and just sort of weigh in on what you think here. I think one of the big themes that come out so far is just that that I've read is a lot of the folks weighing in are like people who are either like operators of Crossplane, like the platform team who've deployed Crossplane, who have built managed resources. And to my mind, those personas, when they're debugging Crossplane, it's reasonable to expect them to go like look at the logs, whereas events are usually targeted more at sort of end users of Crossplane, where I think this might be a little bit overkill amount of information for them.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's, some good discussion on that. And I'm kind of, I personally would be leaning the way that you're leaning on it, Nick. If there are any other opinions on events in debugging and verbosity there, then we can move on to the next pull request. Is this a PR or is this an issue? I think it's an issue. Yeah, okay.
This is an issue. Sorry, I missed PRs. It can go into optional time for deeper technical discussions if we want.
No, yeah, this is fine right here. Because you've been making some progress on this, right?
Not a lot. Apologies, I'm slightly distracted. This is the time of day when my puppy just goes mad and like barks and jumps around and whatnot. She sort of detects when I'm having the most meetings of my day and gets the most fussy. This is an issue that someone from SAP brought up, where he has discovered that Crossplane at scale for certain classes of resources, which mostly is actually AWS networking related resources by coincidence at the moment, Crossplane can actually leak these managed resources. I've been doing a lot of back and forth debugging with, I don't actually know the person's name, D is what he goes by from SAP. And they had noticed they're spinning up clusters up and down a lot. They use AWS VPCs, and one of the resources they use there are route tables at AWS. And they noticed they couldn't delete their VPCs because there were unexpected route tables created in those VPCs. We've triaged that and figured out that it's most likely that Crossplane is actually sometimes, very rarely, when you ask for one route table, you actually get two. You get a duplicate. So part of the problem, that the theory as to why that's happening is certain resources, it's kind of an edge case, but again, especially at AWS, have what we'd say is a non-deterministic unique identifier, right? So without going into too much detail about how the Crossplane like reconcile logic works, it is much better for us if we could tell the cloud what the unique identifier should be for a resource. So it's much better for us if we can say, look, create me a database called Bob, and then we can query on the next thing and be like, is there a database called Bob? And then we can figure out whether that database actually exists or not. Part of this is because, Crossplane works in just a loop where it does a reconcile over and over again. And the sort of rough ordering of what it does is it first observes the world and then it creates updates or deletes things if it needs to. When we observe the world, we basically diff what's stored in the API server for the real world. And when we create, update, or delete, we write to the API server, the Kubernetes API server. Unfortunately, if we happen to have a stale view of a resource and we write to the API server, that write is rejected, we return, and we come back. So we basically, by and large, can't really, we have to write our code very carefully because we have an unreliable state store, kind of, in a way. So what's happening here is, for certain resources, we can't tell it what the unique ID should be. You create something in AWS and it just says, great, you created this in AWS. The unique ID is such and such, like a ARN or whatever for a resource. The risk there is that we'll come in and we'll say, okay, we need to create something in AWS. We'll go make a create call. AWS says, hey, the unique ID is this. And we'll say, cool, I'll just go write that to the API server. And then because of optimistic concurrency control, the API server will say, nope, I reject your write. You can't write this, we'll error out and we'll return, and we will not have persisted that ID to the API server. What we realized is that also potentially when we get an event saying, hey, go reconcile this, sometimes we actually have a stale view from our cache of the resource that we're supposed to reconcile. So we've already added code to try really hard to persist to these external resources rather than just giving up after one error and moving on. We'll actually sit there in a loop for a couple of seconds, trying really hard to persist to the database before we return. But what we do is we persist it to the API server as an annotation, and the presence of that annotation dictates whether we should create a resource or not. The problem that we're seeing here is sometimes we'll see two reconciles coming at around the same time, and they both will appear to not have that annotation on them that says we have created this. That's our gate that says we've created this. So we'll just create the thing twice, and then we'll record its one thread, whichever gets in first, will record its ID. The other one will lose and be gone, and we'll basically have created an extra resource without knowing it. So far, I have just been going through, D gave a lot of debugging information to wade through, a lot. So I tried to recreate this myself. I believe I have. I actually ran a script that just spun up and down VPCs and route tables all night last night, and 2 route tables leaked after about 12 hours of constantly recreating stuff every 2 minutes. So it doesn't happen very much, but it does happen. And I have an idea that is proposed in that issue as to how to address it. Next steps after verifying that I have been able to recreate this, we'll be taking that idea and formalizing it probably in a little bit of a really small one-pager or something. But the very short version is that we can tell if we have the reliable way to tell if you have a stale version of a resource coming into the reconcile is to try and write that back to the API server, and then the API server will reject it and say, sorry, this is a stale resource. So I'm considering adding basically an annotation before we do the create that says we need to go, I'm about to do a create effectively. And then that would basically mean that change the failure mode from one resource is created, another one silently leaks and you just don't know about it, to either one resource is created or one resource cannot be created, and then you've got to go do some manual cleanup.
So one question, so in the controller runtime, it actually guarantees that no reconciliation happens on the same custom resource at the same time. Do you think we should fix that if we should fix the problem if that is not what we get?
I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're asking. My understanding is that the problem is most likely not that we are seeing multiple reconciles at the same time in so much of a race situation. So more as there is maybe the best way to think about it is there might be a race between the state of the cache, which is hydrated by a watch on the API server, and the events somehow are potentially coming. And so we might get an event being like, hey, something's changed, and we'll go read from the cache and we'll get a thing from the cache that's actually slightly old. That's our theory, at least. As I say, the folks at SAP are really eager to get this fixed ASAP. I've been pushing back a little bit, saying we really need to understand this a little bit better. So D has done a lot of debugging, but he comes from a C++ and Java world, so his sort of understanding of the Go code is maybe not as great as those of us who work with it every day. So we do need to come in and I think, you know, get a slightly better understanding of what's happening before we actually go and do anything here. But my hunch is that like the best way to guarantee that this won't happen is to use basically a marker before we do the create so that we can make sure we don't create twice.
Gotcha. Yeah. And also, like, you know, so I see this leak test composition you've got. You said, like, you know, you've seen 2 leakages in 12 hours, right?
Yeah.
Does he see, like, you know, a similar frequency or like no more than that?
My understanding is he posted an update last night, and he said that I'm guessing he said, yeah, around the same. Well, I can't say exactly the same frequency, but he does say it happens very rarely. It's not like a, you know, 1 in 10 times or something like that. It's more like a 1 in 100 times or 1 in 200 times.
Right. Yeah.
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 Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. It's just I was surprised that, like, you know, there's like, you know, possibility that we would get like non-up-to-date version of the CR and possibly, like, you know, 2 Go routines working on the same CR. Like, these are kind of like some of the foundational things that we assume from controller runtime.
Yeah, I suspect it's probably not 2 Go routines working on the same CR at the same time. My hunch is that it is, we're getting them sort of, we're getting maybe the updates in order, but then we have to, like, the way that the code works is basically, as you know, Mabaf knows, you just get told, hey, this thing changed, then you have to go fetch it from the API server, and that fetch to the API server is backed by a cache, and that cache is hydrated by like a list watch on the API server. I'm curious to see whether the events are coming from that cache or coming from something else. The machinery and the code down there is actually quite hard to follow, to be honest. There's a lot of layers of abstraction, so I need to do my traditional once a quarter deep dive into the controller runtime caching and eventing code to remind myself how it all works.
Yeah, just a small detail regarding that. I remember we fixed the specific root table bug regarding, like, you know, status updates that it is doing, and it turned out that, like, composition controller updates were actually causing the resource to be stale in the managed reconciler. So that could be an avenue that you can, like, you know, investigate. Like, maybe that controller invalidates the cache and managed reconciler doesn't know that, hey, a new change is, you know, there.
Yeah, I didn't quite follow that, but let's maybe take this one offline and we can chat about it later.
Yeah, definitely a worthwhile investigation to continue getting to its end. So thanks for the time spent on that. We're pretty much almost out of time here. So any of these issues here, can folks that wanted to bring those up, can we, or any of those that need to be brought up right now, or can we take them to an async format, like, you know, either GitHub or Slack, or postpone them to next community meeting? Any of those available for folks that added issues here?
I think the first one can be moved to next community meeting, because I don't think it's going to be relevant for 1.4, mostly just trying to get people to look at it. The second one, I am going to try and fix this for 1.4. And basically just, I have the proposal for how this would work on the issue, and there's been some back and forth on it, so would love folks to look at that. Nick, I know you opened the 2 at the bottom, and I kind of weighed in on those. I think Locke, we're probably pretty good aligned on promoting that one to V1 Beta 1 for 1.4. I have concerns about controller config that really are difficult to back up because it is being used successfully by a lot of people, but I just have concerns about this, like, catch-all resource sort of, I guess. So I don't know exactly what you wanted to cover for those, Nick, but I'm fine to take those offline too.
For these ones, I imagine few people have opinions about lock, but controller config, I would like to get community input on how they feel about the API, what they'd like to see changed, if anything. I think the broader thing here is that we have these 2 resources, which are the only 2 core resources at the moment that are V1 Alpha 1. As I mentioned, I would like to have alpha resources be off by default in future. I don't think we really want to put these behind a feature flag and turn them off, given that people are using them now. So the other alternative is to promote them to be 1 beta 1. So that was kind of my motivation here. But then the other thing in reality is we don't have a policy about, you know, how long does something get to stay in V1 Alpha 1? How do we make a decision? So I do feel a little uncomfortable with the idea that we have a resource that we kind of don't love, that we're not sure about, what the people are using, and we're just like not promoting it to beta. So I want us to just start spinning the wheels of being like, okay, what's the plan to get these things to beta? Like, you know, we don't have to, like, an option would be to just drop them, or, you know, they're alpha, there's no contract. We can get rid of them, we can re-implement them a different way. Not an urgent priority for V1.4. I just kind of wanted to track that we don't want things to just sit in alpha indefinitely and never get promoted. So we should have a tracking thing to be like, well, how do we get them to beta? At this stage, I think definitely you know, I know Dan's busy and he sort of owns these historically. At this stage, definitely just looking for community feedback on, like, you know, do people love these things, hate them? Would people be upset if they sort of, you know, went to beta or something like that?
Yeah, and so one thing that I think, I think Lock, like, I think generally feels like that's in a good place, and I think there's not much of a pushback to moving that one to beta. The controller config one, I wonder if we should follow up to get, like, solicit more feedback from the broader community, like put it on Slack, like tweet about it or something as well too, to kind of get that out to a broader audience for more feedback and how it's being used or how they want to see it continue to mature.
Yeah, definitely. My hunch is that, you know, for the people who use controller config, they'll probably like, great, yes, it's valuable, we need this. Like, you know, so I don't imagine everyone's going to come back and be like, oh no, I hate this functionality or whatever. The question is more architecturally, you know, is this the right way to do what people are doing? I think that, you know, Dan's concern, and I kind of share it, has been that it's just been kind of like a bag of settings. So you know, maybe there's a better way to frame those settings that we just haven't landed on yet.
Yeah, I'd like for us to factor in both custom compositions, functions, if we want to consider those as packages, and the provider config partitioning all as a part of this, because those all impact how things are configured and given permissions. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's continue following up on that then. All right, so that's everything on the community meeting here. Sorry for going over a little bit here, but definitely appreciate everyone's participation and attendance. And so we will see you all on Slack and GitHub, and in 2 weeks, the next community meeting. Thanks, everybody.